Welcome back to Bay Area Focus. In the 60s, the temple moved to California and established its headquarters in San Francisco. Soon, it gained so much support that politicians and celebrities applauded its work. It was the People's Temple, and the founder was Jim Jones. Author Jeff Guinn documented Jones's rise and tragic downfall in his book, The Road to Jonestown. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
So, Jeff, tell me what drew you to Jim Jones and the People's Temple.
I wanted to understand how, in the middle of the 1970s, someone like Jones could emerge as a figure of power, and how he could keep so many people enthralled to follow him here, into Guyana, the deepest jungle, and finally to death. How does that happen? I wanted to try to answer that question if I could.
And during your research, what did you find? How did he do that?
Jones did it because he was a gifted demagogue, and the greatest talent of a demagogue is to be able to appeal to alienated people, to make them seem to feel they're going to become special if you only follow me. San Francisco in those years set itself up perfectly for Jones to come in and make a great impression.
Yeah, he drew a lot of people in.
Naturally he would. San Francisco at the time was dominated mostly by the Anglo business structure, and people of color and other small groups had no voice. Jones showed them the way to become cohesive and become powers in their own right.
I think something that a lot of people don't know about him is that he was ranked among the nation's most influential civil rights leaders.
And deserved it. Before he came here, he was in Indianapolis. In the 50s, one of the most segregated cities in America. By sheer force of his own personality, years before civil rights laws, he integrated Indianapolis from the school districts to the hospitals. There, he was a real hero. In San Francisco, it began to change.
And he was applauded by all of that work, by people, I mean, the First Lady, Vice President.
Jones was a master at showing people what they wanted to see. But it was also true that because San Francisco had so many great investigative journalists at the time, that eventually his empire began to crumble as stories appeared pointing out the negative side of things that he had been careful to disguise.
So the headquarters were here in Northern California, and then he makes the move to Guyana. Why that move?
The stories that were appearing were robbing Jones of his political base. People's Temple had a small farm set up in the jungles of Guyana in South America, the idea being they were going to grow food distributed to the hungry there. And People's Temple had many great philanthropic programs. Jones fled there, taking about 900 more followers into a small community in the jungle that could only support 100. And once there, his paranoia grew. And because there's no outside voices, he convinces his followers that the American government is pretty much going to converge on them at any time and destroy them.
His behavior became very erratic toward the end, a lot of it because of drug use.
He was a drug abuser, but he was also a megalomaniac, and he was also paranoiac. These are not the kind of traits that mix well with drugs.
So during that time when he was saying all of these really erratic things, how did he keep followers so engaged?
People's Temple had accomplished so many great things under Jones's leadership that many of his followers were willing to excuse all the excesses. That's just Jim being Jim. And again, we have to remember, they're in the jungle, they have no money, he took their passports. How are they going to get away?
Well, you interviewed some of the survivors of Jonestown, some of those people who were able to get away. What do they remember about that day?
What they remember is that the horror is engulfing them and that there is no time to think. Congressman Leo Ryan has been murdered. Jones has called everyone together. He tells them we must make one final revolutionary act. It's not suicide. This was not mindless sheep going to slaughter. We're talking 300 infants and children who had no choice, a couple hundred old people, and many of the other adults fought and were held down and forcibly injected. It was not mass suicide, it was murder.
So many people would call People's Temple a cult. We've all heard that.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Not by the modern definition of cult, which means religious fanatics determined to force the world to come around to their way of thinking. People's Temple wanted to set an example of socialism where everyone's equal and respected despite color, gender, what you owned or didn't. In this case, it's different because people joined the cult that Jim Jones is following so they could give rather than receive. They were going to get nothing from it. They would sacrifice so that others could benefit.
Well, it's a fascinating, fascinating story. Thank you so much for coming on the show, telling us all about your research. I'm sure it was interesting things that you found during that time. So thank you so much, Jeff. And for more information on the road to Jonestown, just log on to simonandschuster.com and search for Jeff Guinn. And after the break, wine for a good cause. We'll be right back.